Hey folks, Southwest Prepper with the Southwest Prepper Group. Folks, today I got a super exciting interview for you folks. An interview for all ages, for everyone to watch. It's a must watch. Anybody involved with prepping, emergency preparedness, or anybody who's thinking about getting into prepping, or even folks who are not into prepping. This is a must watch, folks. I had the pleasure to interview a Dr. Arthur Bradley, NASA engineer, EMP, CME, and prepping expert. Dr. Arthur Bradley is a NASA engineer and the best-selling author of the Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family, the Prepper's Instructional Manual, Disaster Preparedness for EMP Attacks and Solar Storms, and the Post-Apocalyptic Series, The Survivalist. Visit him online for disaster preparedness information at www.disasterprepper.com. I'll put the link in the description below, folks. You're going to love this. Really good interview. Please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and comment below, folks. Do you, if you don't mind, could you start off by telling us a little bit about your background? What got you into prepping, sir?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Arthur Bradley. I guess I got into prepping. I kind of grew up all along as a kid with a father who was, Marine and into things like, I remember as a kid we used to sit around the table and look at things like, the blast maps if the United States were to be attacked. Things kind of like that. We always had survival sort of on our mind in different ways. And then I went in the Army as an airborne infantryman and came out and got married and had kids. And then I guess what really got me into it was the 9/11 attacks. I remember thinking that my family was just not really very well prepared. We were just sort of very trusting of the government that everything was going to be all right. And at that time, it was very unclear what the danger was to the country. So anyway, I got into disaster preparedness as a whole, really. And I started by reading just about everything that was written on it. And I thought it was pretty good, but I thought I'd put my own sort of manifesto together of what I thought was important in terms of preparedness. So I wrote a big handbook on that. And then that just sort of led one thing to another. I'm not a doomsday prepper, never have been that way. I'm sort of a very practical-based person. I always think you prepare for what's likely to get you first and then sort of expand from there. And
Exactly.
So I've been involved in it for quite a while. Lately, probably the last 10 years, a lot of it has been related to preparing for EMP attacks, just because my background is in that area. So I've been fairly well known in that area. I answer a lot of questions and stuff in that area for people.
Okay, and as far as I understand, are you currently working for NASA, sir? Doctor?
Yeah, I still work for NASA. I sure do. I've been there, I guess, since 2003. So about 17 or 18 years or so.
Oh, wow, okay. And is that job primarily dealing with electromagnetic pulses or CMEs or stuff like that, or is that something completely different?
No, my background is electrical engineering. I have a PhD in electrical engineering, and so my job at NASA is related to electronics. Certainly, we build satellites and different types of electronic systems that go into space. But a lot of it is electromagnetics. I'm certainly one of the people, fairly well known, I guess, in terms of solving electromagnetic problems within NASA. But my day job is honestly more management now. I'm a manager of a large electronics group, so I do a lot of that sort of daily duty type stuff.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, sir. And I understand we'll start off with, let's see, we just purchased a couple of your books recently, Prepper's Instruction Manual, 50 Steps to Prepare for Any Disaster. Very good book. And also the Disaster Preparedness for the EMP Attacks and Solar Storms. Also a really good book. This is, I guess, as being a prepper, like you said, most of us try to prepare for what's going to get us first. And I always tell people, it's not a doomsday thing. You have to basically start off by your location and what can get you from there, from if you're on the coast, if you
Right.
live on a fault, if you live near a volcano, um, the desert, just like I do, there's always a reason to be prepared, and basically have water and food and all those basic necessities. And your books here, the EMP attack and solar storm, I really like that book because it goes back into the basics. It doesn't just cover, of course, the CMEs and EMPs, but it starts off at the basic, at what you should be preparing for. And could you tell us a little more about, for the basic person, or a new person rather, say, getting into preparing or prepping, how would you, or what kind of advice would you give them, or where would you point them into starting prepping? What would you
Sure.
tell
Sure.
them to look at, would you, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think you hit it on the money there to begin with. I sort of advocate this three-step process to preparing, and it's really obvious and simple, but it's a way of thinking about it. And the first step is to just figure out what it is that you're worried about, right? So, like,
Right.
I live on the East Coast, and we worry about hurricanes and things like that. Somebody who lives in Colorado would have very different worries. Maybe they worry about blizzards and other things. And then there's other common threats that we all worry about, maybe terrorist attacks or crime or pollution, or there's a lot of different threats on us. And so you come up with a list of what it is you and your family are worried about. And some of it, of course, is dependent on your family's vulnerabilities, right? I mean, if you have small children, you have certain vulnerabilities, or if you're an elderly couple or so forth, right?
Right.
And you make that list of these are the things, that we're really concerned about. And then you ask yourself for step two, what are the impacts of these things happening to us, right? Like in the case of a blizzard, if you're in an area that could be hard hit by blizzards. I mean, I grew up in Colorado. We'd get snowed in sometimes for a week where we couldn't leave the house. I mean, the door was blocked with snow, and you couldn't go out and get food easily. I mean, even if you could, a lot of the places were closed.
Right.
And so you make you assess what the impacts are. And the impacts of things are very different. Like here in the East Coast, when we moved here, very shortly after we got here, it was hit by a huge hurricane, Hurricane Isabel.
Okay.
And there was parts of power was out for 6 weeks. And, not having any preparation for 6 weeks is difficult without power. It's just difficult to make sort of your life bearable. And a lot of people had to go inland for that. But anyway, so you sort of assess what those impacts are. That's the second step. And then the third step is you take these very careful actions to try and address those impacts. So maybe in the case of the hurricane, it would be to make sure you have, a backup power system that you could run for an hour a day. And an hour a day of having power is a million times better than no time having power. And things like that, or having stored water, fresh water, so that you don't have to be out hunting water. I do remember in that case, we just moved here, and we really weren't very well prepared. And we had to hunt. We went inland to my brother's home, and he wasn't prepared at all, and he had a well, but he didn't have any power, so he couldn't get water out of his well.
Right.
So we had to hunt for water to flush the commodes and things like that. And, it was unnecessarily risky for us to be out doing that. Had we been a little better prepared, we would have weathered it better. And so that's the third step I always tell people is, figure out what those steps you can take that would really affect those impacts that you're worried about. And usually it starts with our basics, which is, food and water. We want to make sure we can have, our basic food and water and heating, make sure we're not going to freeze. And there's a whole laundry list of different needs we have. I talk about them in that handbook that I wrote, but people can kind of sit down and think through them. What are the things that I'm going to be in trouble without, and then put in some preparations to meet those. And that's kind of my advice to folks, is to think about it in that three-step process.
Okay. Very good advice. I appreciate that, Doctor. And what do you have to say to people? I get this question a lot. Why are you preparing? And after I discuss it with them, they still kind of look at me like, well, the power's on, the power goes off, the power comes back on, the water may go off, the water comes back on, and it's sometimes almost impossible to talk to people who are questioning why to prepare. What would you say to somebody that's I guess I don't want to say they doubt, but they just don't understand why they should prepare? Because I actually get that question a lot.
Yeah, I do too. I give talks sometimes, and there's certainly that sense of, And it's actually a very fair question, because we live in a world with a lot of safety nets, and our systems are pretty robust, right? I
Exactly.
mean, you can think about, well, we don't lose water very often. It's very rare that we can't get food,
Right.
and you can go on down the list of, our world is pretty secure, right?
Exactly.
And the truth of it is pretty secure right up until the moment that it's not.
Right.
And then when things go bad, they can go bad pretty quickly, and they can get pretty bad. This pandemic is a great example, right?
Exactly.
Regardless of what people's beliefs are, things sort of, and I very early in this COVID outbreak, I did a video, and I don't even remember how many people had been affected, but not many, tens of thousands. And the U.S. only had handfuls of cases. And I told people that the time to get ready for something is before it happens, because, it's better to be a month early than 3 minutes late. And
Right.
I was trying to tell people, you're already a little late, but you're not too late. You can take some preparations. You can get masks. You can get various prep supplies that you might need. And people, some listened, some didn't. And there were groups that were, sort of hard hit because they didn't put preparations in order. And this is a very mild. I mean, yeah, we've lost 500,000 Americans, if you believe those numbers, but it's a very mild pandemic.
Right.
What could have been, had we had a big SARS or MERS outbreak that killed many, many more percentage of people,
Exactly.
and the world would be fundamentally different. And so the thing I tell people is that, yeah, you're right. Most of the time, these preparations are not needed. Just like insurance, we buy insurance for our cars and our houses. They're not needed. That's how people make money, is because they're not needed. But when you need them really bad. And it's very similar to an idea of insurance. Is I've always been a conservative person, that I like to know, I'm ready for hard times of one sort or another. And prepping is very similar, that sort of similar mindset, that I know that if I can't get food and water for a month, my family is not going to be starving. We're not going to die from it. And I know that, we have various preparations in order that we could at least, make it to the next step. We can get to figure out where we've got to be and what we've got to do to survive, as opposed to, literally having no safety nets, my own personal safety nets to help carry me forward. And what do I stand to lose by being prepared? Not much.
Right.
I don't go crazy in it. I don't like, I can't send my kids to college because I've got to go buy this. But having some preparation in order really hasn't cost me much in terms of my lifestyle. And I feel better, I sleep better. And there have been a number of times when things have gotten a little dicey, not end of world dicey, but a little dicey, where neighbors have come over and said, hey, do you mind if we go down in your storm shelter? There's bad weather coming. Yeah, I don't mind at all. Come on in, or can we run off your generator for an hour because we've got, this really big problem we need to take care of, or can we borrow a case of water because we didn't think to get some? Those kinds of things, I was able to help others with as well. And so I see a lot of benefits to it and not very many drawbacks, as long as you can keep a level-headed mindset about it.
Exactly. I totally agree there. Being able to help others, that's one of my main goals when I tell people to start prepping. It's not just for you and your family, but we live in a community, and we can't really do that whole lone wolf thing. We can, but not for very long, because we always have to come back to the community, whether what a disaster, natural disaster, whatever happened, we always have to come back and rebuild, because it takes a community to get all these things back up and running again. We're not going to be living out in tents and roasting rabbit over a fire for very long. Most of us we like our creature
Right.
comforts, and we want to get back home. So I tell people that you got to prepare not just for yourself, but for your community, your neighbors, your family, your friends, because you don't want to see anybody out there suffering. And if you can do something, you definitely will. And I like to tell people the perfect example of this was this polar vortex and how it affected the Midwest, especially Texas. I don't know if you were familiar with the whole event.
Oh, yes.
I'm next door there, so I saw it all happen. I have family down in Texas, and that was a very big eye opener. I think it should have been for a lot of people, because just like you said, natural disasters, the weather, that cold weather, the infrastructure was not prepared, people were not prepared, and we actually had a loss of lives in 2021. And that to me is kind of mind-blowing, because Yes, it's Texas. They have pretty mild winters, but when people can't heat or can't produce enough heat to keep themselves alive in this day and age, that's a big eye opener to me. Um, just basic necessities, electricity, having running water, having heat, and we actually had millions of people suffer from that. And I think that's
Right, right.
a big lesson, I guess, for a lot of us. Um, to I guess I like to point people in that direction. If you don't understand why I prep or why you should prep, please look at Texas, because it was just a freak snowstorm, and the whole thing just the whole infrastructure just kind of crumbled. There was
Right.
when they could find water, it was contaminated. They had to boil it and filter it. There was in some places very little food, of course, because electricity was out. It just a snowstorm started like this trickle effect that just kind of pretty much laid out the almost the entire state. So that's a big eye opener to me. Why we should prepare or be prepared. And my family now in Texas is very much prepared because, like I said, living down there, they don't expect much. It gets hot in the summertime, but other than that, it's a pretty mild place for weather. And a lot of people were not prepared for any type of cold weather at all. So it could happen at any time, any place to anyone. That's one of my big messages. Um, as far as the EMPs, I'd like to talk a little bit about that and probably a little bit about the CMEs too. I don't like to scare people too much on my channel. Like you said, I don't like to do that whole doom and gloom thing. But this topic, CMEs and EMPs, are, I think, very important because it's a life changing or can be life altering events for us here in the United States. If I may, can we start off with your explanation of CMEs?
Sure. Yeah. So a CME is a coronal mass ejection. It's a natural phenomenon. Basically, the sun throws off a big blob of plasma, and it does all the time. It throws plasma in different directions. And
Right.
if a big blob of plasma washes over the Earth, it can perturbate the magnetic field lines of the Earth and ultimately cause currents to flow at the Earth's surface. And those currents can flow along very long conductors. So things like our power wires, the utility wires, but any long conductors, anything that are miles long, can get these currents flowing in them. And they're very high currents. They're very damaging currents. And so the biggest threat from CME is that it would take out these large utility transformers. And transformers just change the voltage down or up for transmission. And it would damage those transformers. And the transformers are not the kind we think of out on the pole, on our power poles. These are giant room or building-sized transformers, gigantic transformers that
Right.
are very difficult to replace or repair. They're not built in the U.S., is my understanding, and there are very few spares. And so if these transformers, if you had a big CME wash over the Earth and caused a lot of damaging currents, you could take out a significant portion of the grid, maybe in the United States. Several of the interconnects could go down. And those transformers, if they were damaged, might be very difficult to repair or replace, might take months to repair or replace. Some people even say more than a year. And that could leave a portion of the country without electrical power for a long period of time. And there's been a number of studies, people have looked at this, and projections can be really dire, like, 90% of the people are going to die, which I think is not realistic, because we as a nation and we as a world tend to step in and provide relief where things are bad.
Right.
But I don't think I think it's important to recognize that it would be a very severe crisis, one unlike any we've seen,
Correct.
even unlike this pandemic. I think the number of deaths would be very large. There would be a lot of hardship. And so it would basically be a portion of the country that could suffer from very long-term blackouts. And everything we have is related to all of our infrastructures hinge on electricity. It's kind of the lifeblood that flows through all of our infrastructures, from government to transportation to banking to everything. Electricity is critical to all of it, and
Right.
emergency services, everything. So if electricity falls, pretty quickly all of the other infrastructures start to collapse as well, and so it's a very grave threat, and it's not just the United States, it's anywhere in the world. It depends on how the Earth was facing when that washed over, where it would be affecting the worst. And so it's a threat that's very severe. It's expected to happen about every 150 years, believe it or not. Statistically, if you look, a large CME hits the Earth about every 150 years. The last one that hit the Earth that was really significant was the Carrington event back in the 1800s, and a lot of people, use that by comparison. They sort of draw a comparison to what happens if that same CME hit the Earth today, what would happen, and there's a lot of grave projections of what would happen. So the short of it is, it's a natural thing that will occur. It may not occur this year, it may not occur tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, who knows? Nobody knows. But if a large CME were to hit the Earth, there would certainly be damage to our infrastructures. And depending on the size of the CME, depending on where it hit, a lot of factors, it could be anything from, very inconvenient to the area to a major global catastrophe. And that's the short of it. And it's a guaranteed thing. It's not this may happen one day. It absolutely will happen. It's just a question of when and how bad it'll be that's unknown. And so the preparations for CME, for a CME hitting the Earth are pretty, basic. You get all your you think about the impacts that are going to be affecting you if you were in an area that was hit, and that means you've got to have some basic supplies to weather the worst of it. You've got to be able to evacuate if you're in a hard-hit area, and you can go on down the list. You can think through what you would need to do if you're in an area that was going to be faced with a long-term blackout and very few resources and very few utilities and infrastructures around you. So that's kind of what a CME is. It's different than what we'll talk about next, which is an EMP, but it's also similar in many ways to an EMP.
Correct. Now, you mentioned the Carrington event. What size of a CME would be on our radar to expect something in that kind of a damage to the infrastructure? Because, like you said, CMEs happen all the time.
Sure.
I watch a lot of programs or YouTube that cover CMEs, and they do happen all the time. We have some actually happen in the last couple of days. So what would you say that what we should look out for a CME strength-wise?
I don't know that I don't remember offhand. There's three different systems, I think, of measuring the disturbance level. There's like a DST, and all those are in the book, but I don't have those in memory. But we know CMEs are coming. That's the interesting thing, is that a CME does not travel at the speed of light.
Right.
Unlike a solar flare, which a solar flare occurs and you really can't get warning of them because it goes at the same speed as your warning, right? So we have satellites that watch the sun, and they're circling the sun or they're orbiting the sun, and they see when these things happen. And the disadvantage is some things happen at the same speed at which they can relay the warning, and so you can't really get warning from them, or not much.
I gotcha.
And then other things, like CMEs, go much slower. It might take a CME a couple of days to get to the Earth. And so many times, if you watch, there's all kind of internet sites you can go and you get real-time reports on the sun. It's really fascinating.
Right.
And they'll tell you, there's been a relatively large, a class, X whatever, that's coming toward the Earth. And they can they'll know ahead of time. They do know ahead of time how big the CME is.
Okay.
And I once asked a NASA guy that, I said, well, if you've got this, this big, gigantic CME coming toward the Earth, can't you tell what's going to happen? Like, that we're going to have blackouts, going to damage the grid, and then you could take down the grid ahead of time, maybe put it in some hardened state.
Right.
And he said that, surprisingly, you don't know its effect on the Earth until it's happening. And I was surprised by that. He said it might be minutes. You might only have minutes of knowledge that of something's going to happen, and by that time you really don't have much time to take action, in terms of a national scale.
Okay.
And so, yes, this big CME is coming, and there's warnings of it, and sometimes there are places that can take down small pieces of the grid or something to prepare for it. But most of the time, you don't know its effect, and the impacts of taking down any portion of the grid is serious.
Right.
And so usually they weather them out, and they repair the damage, whatever gets damaged, right? So it's a weird thing where you see it coming, but you don't really know its impact until it kind of is a little too late. And now maybe if we had like a tremendously powerful CME, unlike any that we'd seen in the last 100 years, maybe the government itself would try and take some precautions to harden our grid in terms of maybe powering down certain things. But I don't even know if that would help. I don't think there's been enough study on that. So it's a difficult thing to know, which one's going to be important and which ones are not.
Okay, I see. Now, you also mentioned, I believe, your solar cycles. We're entering solar cycle, I believe, or we have entered solar cycle 25, I believe, and there's supposed to be some type of maybe an uptick in solar or sun activity.
Solar activity, yeah.
Yes, sir. Can you explain a little more about that?
Well, I'm not a. I mean, I've seen the charts. There's charts people can get that show. There's certainly solar cycles, no doubt about it.
Right.
And then there's these predictions about when you're going to get more solar activity or less solar activity. But it's not a very strongly correlated. The predictions don't really go with reality that well.
Okay.
I remember when I wrote that book, we were in I think we were near a solar maximum, and there was expected to be certain events, and they didn't happen then. And so, I mean, I don't personally put a lot of value in those premonitions or predictions of, we're headed toward a solar minimum or a solar maximum, so this is going to be worse or this is going to be worse. I think the sun is so incredibly complex. Yes, we understand its general cycles, but a tiny blurb of energy, essentially electromagnetic energy coming off of it, is essentially difficult to predict, right? And if there was one that blasted out the wrong direction. I think it was a couple years ago. That was enormous. If it had come in our direction, it very likely would have taken out all of the power if any portion of the planet had hit. But it just didn't go our way. It went in a different direction in space, and nobody predicted it. It just kind of burped out this energy, and that's the way I view the sun. I almost view it as a randomized process that there's statistically a certain probability of something happening. And yeah, probably sometimes there's more statistically probable of it happening, but I think it could happen any day of any season, of any cycle, and so I try not to. I just never put too much credence in that personally.
Understood. I appreciate that, Doctor, clearing that up. Yeah, there's the solar cycles have been a little interesting to follow. There's always lots of news going on with those different solar cycles, but. All right, let's get on to the EMP, the electromagnetic pulses. Could you tell us a little bit about your knowledge on electromagnetic pulses?
Sure. Yeah. So an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, it's essentially an attack. A person or an entity, a country, launches a nuclear weapon high into the atmosphere, and high, I'm thinking 100 miles or more. Okay, so very, very high up. And they detonate a nuclear warhead up very high in the atmosphere. And it's so high up that there's no shock wave at the surface. There's no radiation. You can see a flash of light perhaps, but that's about it.
Okay.
But very similar to like a coronal mass ejection, it emits gamma rays essentially that perturbate around the Earth's magnetic field lines. They strip electrons, and these electrons cause currents to flow, and the currents come down to the surface of the Earth. They induce currents at the surface of the Earth, damaging currents, and they have a number of effects. Very similar to a coronal mass ejection, they couple energy into very long conductors like the power grid, and they can cause the same sort of effects that a CME could. So they can blow out these transformers and cause blackouts and big problems for us. And it's probably the biggest threat of an EMP. Actually, is the same as the CME, that it would take out our electrical grid. But unfortunately, EMP has other higher frequency energy associated with it too. And that energy can couple into smaller electronics. So it can couple into cars, it can couple into your cell phone, it can couple into your radios. And so things that are much, much smaller in scale now. Now, the sun won't couple energy into those, but an EMP could. And it's enough energy that it could damage those electronics. So you could lose computers, and more importantly, you could lose devices and controllers that control parts of our infrastructure. And so you might, even if you had power, you will have blown out various controllers around the systems, and you won't be able to operate anyway. And so lots and lots of electronics could be damaged. Personal electronics, system electronics for the government, for private industries. And the extent of what damage that would be is not really known. I mean, there's been a number of tests. We had a lot of tests back in the 60s with EMPs, and there's simulators built, this thing called the Trestle, where they built this giant wood structure and they tested EMPs on military aircraft and things. All very interesting. But the truth of it is we've never had a large-scale EMP attack on a country, even though Russia did detonate an EMP over their own country at least one occasion. But it was small. It was a small-scale thing. And so we don't know the extent of it, but the predictions are anywhere from everything's going to stop working to, for small scale, it'll be a modest amount of things that might get affected. I think the truth of it is somewhere in the middle, that certainly the power grid would be at risk, and I think that is the gravest threat. And I think personal electronics and vehicles and things, there would be a percentage that was damaged. And if we just pick a percentage, like cars, we just say, how many cars would be damaged? Well, let's say 10%, just as a number. And I don't know if that number is right. Maybe the number is 25% or 3% or something else. But if you just think about 1 out of every 10 cars in the United States that was operating suddenly stopped operating, it might be hard to imagine an interstate where all of a sudden 1 out of every 10 cars suddenly stopped working. And the kind of chaos and loss of life and mayhem that would cause is hard to even really think through. It would be an unimaginable scenario. And that's not counting all the disruption that you couldn't get communications through. Nobody could call for help. I mean, there would just be huge ramifications from this type of an attack. And estimates have said that, like an attack over just the eastern seaboard, just the eastern United States, could easily cost $1 trillion. Right? I mean, immediately $1 trillion worth of damage. So it's what they call an asymmetric attack, where a country could, without really, killing anyone directly or causing any direct property damage, they could do this form of attack to cause huge infrastructure damage, and maybe even get away denying it, or maybe get away with saying, without a direct nuclear confrontation afterward is the idea. So it's a very grave threat. There are people out there who don't think it's real. Well, it's all hocus pocus. It's just made up. I don't know why they say that, because there's been a number of real-world tests of EMPs, and they know exactly what happens and why. So I don't know why that people deny that. But
interesting.
And the good news is it's hard to initiate, right? I can't initiate an EMP attack on the United States if I wanted to, because you need a couple of things. You need a warhead that can get way up in the atmosphere, and it has to be big enough and accurate enough and powerful enough to carry a nuclear warhead.
Okay.
And you have to have that nuclear warhead. So not just anyone can do it, right?
Okay.
Right now, the countries that definitely could do it, that are our enemies, are Russia and China. Those are the two for certain that if they wanted to, they could initiate an EMP attack. Russia a number of times has threatened to.
Right.
And so, yes, there are now places like North Korea. They would love to make you believe they could do it, but it's not entirely clear that they possess the technology yet to do it.
Okay.
Same way with Iran or somebody. But there are countries that can do it. They possess weapons to do it. And it would be a part of if there was another world war between two superpowers, it would absolutely be part of that war.
Okay, so definitely Russia and China are definitely on the radar for capability for an EMP.
Yeah,
Most likely.
We are too, of course. We have the ability
Right.
to do it too. And I'm sure, they're thinking the same thing. And the government's hardened a lot of systems, a lot of military systems. But we in the commercial, normal living world, it's too expensive. And so our grid is not hardened very well, and
Right.
our personal electronics are not hardened very well. And so the impact would really be felt, I think, largely in our infrastructures. I think we would have a terrible impact to our infrastructures.
I agree. I definitely agree there, Doctor. That's very all good, very information. As far as prepping for a CME or a EMP, I noticed on your website that you have some was it the it's a cloth, I think it is. Have you had any success testing that cloth for the? I believe it's like a Faraday cloth or something like that. Could you clarify what type of material that is?
Sure. Yeah. So, there's a number of ways to prepare for like an EMP, let's say, and the most important is you get your basic preparations in order: food, water, shelter, all those sorts of things, right?
Right.
But then people want to know, well, how do I protect my stuff?
Exactly.
I want to make sure that my car is going to run and I can get out of Dodge if I'm in a bad hit area, or that,
Right.
any electronic item I have has some value. Maybe it's important for medical reasons, or there's lots of things we have that we depend on, and so there are various things you can do to protect. Small things can be put in what are called Faraday cages, which are just metal enclosures, and
Right.
they sell bags. Like we have bags on our website, disasterprepare.com, where you can just stuff like your laptop and small things into a little bag and roll up the top. It provides enough shielding that an EMP would not damage anything inside. Other
Interesting.
people build, metal garbage cans.
Right.
They can go to Lowe's and buy a big garbage can and put a little gasket in, metal gasket in the lid, and you can put your stuff in the garbage can and seal it up, and it would survive an EMP. Anything you put in there would survive. So it's not that it's impossible to make things survive. It's that you have to go to some trouble to shield these things, and some things are difficult to shield. Like easy things are small things. You can find like these containers and put them in. But what about, like, let's say my car? Well, I can't stick my car in a box very easily that's well sealed. And so what we did is we tested a number of different conductive cloths. And all it really is it's a cloth, a cotton cloth, like a denim,
Okay.
that they use stainless steel thread in it. And so it's not just cotton, but it's interwoven with metal thread all throughout it.
Oh.
If you felt of it with your hands, it would feel a little bit almost like a wool. It would kind of be grady on your fingers, if you rubbed your fingers against it. But you wouldn't know there was metal in it unless you put it under a microscope, and then you can see the threads. And what it does is it creates a metal blanket, right? And you can take this cloth and you can sew it into a big cover, and you can drape it over your car, and it acts very much like a shielded barrier that if energy comes from above, an EMP, it gets absorbed and reflected by the conductive barrier, so it gets absorbed and reflected by that cloth, and it helps a car survive. Or anything else, a generator or an ATV or a motorcycle, things that are difficult to protect other ways can be covered with that cloth. And it works great. We tested 24 of them, and they're all, the bad thing about the cloth is they're very easy to use is a good thing. The bad thing is they're very expensive. Conductive cloth is not cheap.
Right.
And so to get a cover made that covers like my Honda Civic, might be like $1,800. I mean, it's not cheap in any stretch, but some people buy them. They say, no, it's worth it. I'm going to buy a cover. I'm going to take care of it. It'll last me my life, and I'll use it to cover my vehicle. But so that's sort of a method, a surefire method of covering a vehicle. Now, the problem, of course, is we drive our vehicles a lot of times, and you can't cover it when you're driving it. And so I developed some transient protection devices that go inside of a car. Basically, they plug into your cigarette lighter, and then they attach across your battery. So if you have two cigarette lighters, you plug one in each cigarette lighter, and you put one across your battery. And they're not as good as the cover because the cover is completely encompasses, but they do dampen any transients that get developed in your cables in your car. And so they do a really good job, actually, a surprisingly good job. And I think they would be adequate under most circumstances for a car to survive an EMP. So, and they're much less expensive. They're like $50 a piece. Maybe you need 3 of them, so you're talking about $100 and something. But it's much less expensive, and you get to use them when you're driving, which is great. They don't draw any power. They don't do anything negative until you need them, and then they just turn on and shunt away energy. So there's sort of two different methods, different camps of it. Some people actually do both, but there's the camp of, well, I'm going to cover it when I'm not in use, and then there's the camp of, well, that's too expensive. I'm just going to put these transient protectors in, and at least my car will have some protection. And I think those are viable. Both are viable methods. And everything, not just cars. Other things have different types of protections. Your home, you can try and protect your home from energy coming in on the power lines. You can put a good surge protector on your breaker panel. We have one on ours.
Okay.
There's some ferrites you can get. We don't sell the surge protectors, but we tell people which ones are good. and you can put ferrites on the power wires to help suppress the currents that might come in. So there's these things you can do, these modest, I'm talking about in cost. They're tens or hundreds of dollars, and sort of get a level of protection of your property. But I always tell people, that's step two. All of those things, the covers and the protections, it's all after you've set aside and you've made sure you've got food and you've got water and you've got a way to protect your family and stay warm.
Right.
Because if you don't have those things, it really doesn't matter if your TV's still working or your computers are still working, right?
Yeah.
You got to make sure you got things to eat and stuff. And so get your basic preparations in order. And then if you want to turn some attention to this threat, and it's a real threat, then you can start looking at it and be careful and calculating about what you do.
Understood. Okay. The reason why I asked about the cloth is I'm actually into solar. I'm a kind of a solar guru. I actually build off-grid systems, miniature portable systems. So I'm very interested in protecting my investment as far as solar goes and the solar generators. And like you said, you can't fit everything into a small Faraday cage like a trash can or something like that. So that's why I was really interested in your cloth. If I could, I believe in having backups for backups. I have extra solar panels, extra cable connections, and all that good stuff. So in order to protect my investment, this is something I was very interested in. And
Sure.
especially for solar, because solar generators right now or power banks are becoming really popular, especially for blackouts. We've having blackouts all over the time now, and those are, so we definitely want to be able to protect those investments. So what was the name of the website that everybody could find all your information, all your goodies on there, sir?
Yeah, it's disasterpreparer.com.
Okay, disasterpreparer.com, and I'll go ahead and put a link in the description below. Alrighty, sir.
Right.
I do appreciate your time. I believe we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I really do appreciate your time. You have explained a lot to us, and I hope that we could get more people prepared and be ready for whatever comes for tomorrow. It's not about fear. We just hope for the best and we prepare for the worst.